Welcome to Round Trip with Kestrel, where this week we'll be once again visiting Coventry, Connecticut with Susan Macneil. Susan, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. First of all, I'm very excited to be speaking with you about the Twinning Project. And I love that you're involved in this really incredible opportunity for the city of Coventry, UK. I grew up in Coventry, Connecticut, a rural farming community. And certainly, just from our population difference alone, back in the 60s, when I had some experience with twinning, there were 300,000 people plus in the UK, and there were 6,300 in Coventry, Connecticut. So you can imagine how exciting it was to think, oh my God, the place where the Beatles grew up. People from UK are coming to Coventry, Connecticut, where we pretty much only saw cows, everywhere. So we were very, very excited. Today I live in Vermont, and I think of my time in Coventry as really, really important formative years. And so I'm just going to stop now and let you continue and ask me whatever you wish.
Well, to be fair, you're right along the track of what I wanted to ask you initially. Is you have a lot of both secondhand and firsthand experience with city exchanges, especially between UK's Coventry and the US's. And so during Coventry, Connecticut's 250th anniversary, I believe you had witnessed the first sort of city exchange in 1962. What was that like?
Well, actually, in 1962, I was 9 years old.
I'm sure there are many memories you can pull from
So
that.
quite honestly, I have to be truthful here. I do not remember that first exchange. But as I got older, and prior to the actual exchanges happening when I was 14, 15, and 16, we had heard about that. And the very fact that Coventry, Connecticut was named by people from Coventry, England was just, astonishing, like mind blowing. What did I find out here? Happened in 1711? 1711 was when we were settled and named after our counterpart sister city in the UK. So, what I recall after the fact is how exciting it was for Coventry, Connecticut to actually have the mayor of Coventry, UK say, sure, we'll come and celebrate your 250th anniversary. Absolutely. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary, really.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so over like the few years, like there had been like quite a few different exchanges. Um, One I'm particularly interested in is the one where your band friends had sort of gone over to the UK. What did you learn from them and their experience?
Yes. Well, the year prior, we had guests, kids our age, essentially, teenagers, come to Coventry, Connecticut. Wasn't particularly a band exchange, but it was just a visit. We had a friend, Martin, stay at my home. And I remember that we introduced him to Kentucky Fried Chicken, which wasn't really a thing then, although now it's everywhere in the world. And he was just a lovely, lovely person to connect with. And that was very exciting. Then the following year, our band went over to the UK. And I am still friends with, as old as we are now, we're still all miraculously connected. And so I have told them about this twinning, opportunity to speak with you and all of the exciting things going on in Coventry, UK. And they were very excited to share some of their memories. And the memories that really stayed with them, first of all, they got to stay at the mayor's house. Three of my friends got to stay with the mayor, and that was a very big deal. Very big deal.
Mm,
They they learned how to make gooseberry pie, which
a
certainly was not
classic.
a thing in Connecticut. And they actually watched the moon landing in his living room, and I
Yeah,
just love that. Kind of personifies, doesn't it, the whole notion of sister cities for something
yeah.
so critical to the United States, for them to view that in the UK. And their recollection was just that it was this very kind of somber, important moment, and that the UK, their hosts celebrated right along with us. So that was very cool. They also remember that they were told they had pretty bad manners. Now remember, we we came from a small, very small rural farming community.
Mm.
And the one thing that they all remembered was around the dinner table when the roll was on the roll plate, they took the roll, they opened it up, and they slathered butter on it, and they put it back on the plate. And it was like, no, no, that's not what you do. That's not polite. You break off a piece of bread, and then you butter it, and then you put it in your mouth. And I just love it that all these decades later, that's a memory. Gooseberry pie, being called out on bad manners and learning how to butter bread, and then the seminal moment of the moon landing in the UK.
Mm.
We also had a band leader in Coventry, Connecticut. His name was Carl Salina, and although this was the last encounter that I recall from 1968, he went on through the 80s, and he would bring the band over to the UK. They would perform outside the cathedral and all over the city. He was a real linchpin to continuing the twinning movement between our two communities.
Right. It's interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
he doesn't do the work still, does he? Has that been sort of passed
No, he's
down?
he's passed away.
My
Yeah. So
condolences.
and I'm trying to find out. I have a meeting in 2 weeks with the current town manager of Coventry, Connecticut,
Okay.
to talk with him about what's happened since the 80s. And I also have a meeting set up with the woman who runs the Historical Society. And she's going to provide me with some archival information that I then will share with you. So Rose and I talked about that as well. She wants to have a Zoom meeting with her. So that woman has just gotten out of a surgical experience, but when she's well in a couple of weeks, we're going to move forward with that. So that will be fun.
It's a lot to look forward to, it seems.
Oh, I'm so excited about this. I just think it's the loveliest thing.
And I did want to go back and touch on something I had noticed. It's really interesting to me how a lot of the cultural exchange starts with or is most defined by an exchange of food or a culture surrounding food. Specifically, of course, your experience with Martin and sharing like Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then obviously the table manners and gooseberry pie. And it seems that like there is a lot that you can still take away from your friend's experience from when they were overseas. But is there anything you learned from Martin in particular?
Um, what I recall is in comparison to myself and all my friends, he was just so well mannered. He related to adults in a very compelling way. He was able to sit with my parents and go, they would take him on outings, forget me. They would go off with with Martin. They tried to take him to some historical places in the area around Coventry. There's some very old settlements, so they would visit those. So he'd have a bit of a historical sense, although they did get him lost once. They all got lost in the middle of this settlement, in the middle of the woods, found their way back. But
Luckily.
and I just remember having these really lovely adult conversations with Martin. And for me, that stands out as a distinction. Um, there also was a bike ride that we went on. We went to Provincetown, which is on the Cape Cod, in Massachusetts. And I just remember there were a couple of exchange students who were there, and they were just wild guys. They were on those bikes and they were out in front of everybody. And so there was an interesting juxtaposition between my experience with Martin, who seemed way more cultured per se,
Mm,
and then these guys who were more like us, that were just kids, having fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
I I know that there are like so many rules of engagement when it comes to like civility in Britain, but that again, I think it shows the sort of multifaceted nature of culture.
Absolutely. I mean, we were so thrilled with the idea of being in any way connected with the UK that our high school held a mod dance. mod, mod. And I just remember that, played all the British music that we could find, and everybody dressed like they thought Twiggy would dress. And we had, silver lame mini dresses on, and it was just really interesting to think for a moment that there was this thread that was real, that we had experienced that friendship, and that we in turn had gone to England. I can't even imagine. I'll have to ask my friends what they were thought of. I mean, other than the
Mm.
bad manners, what if they picked up on any impressions from other people, because they did a lot of touring. They were in the band. They did a lot of performances, and so their experience was different than mine. I wish I had been able to go, but I was not able to go.
Is there a reason that you weren't able to go?
Well, my family didn't have enough money.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a considerable cost, and I had three brothers, and it just didn't work out. I would have loved to go. Are you kidding me? Oh
Mm.
my God, London is one of my favorite places now. But and in fact, the few times that I've been in England, in London in particular, I hearken back to what it would have been like for me if I had been able to have that experience when I was 15 and 16.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm glad you've been able to go in the time since. But even from just the sort of secondhand experiences you had earlier on, it
Hmm.
seems as though it's affected you in quite a profound way.
Hmm.
And I want to touch on how that's affected your work since and the way that you've approached sort of your creative life and everything else surrounding that.
Well, I think that the experience begins with the fact that it was possible. Like, this was an extraordinary possibility, that somebody in town thought they could just contact the UK and say, "Hey, come on over. It's 250 years since you named since you named us. We'd love you to celebrate with us." Um, but having just the little bit of exposure that I did, it opened up the world for me. It instantly opened up the world for me, because otherwise, as I said, we're in a town of 6,000 people, and you know pretty much everybody that you see. You certainly know everybody in your small high school class of 300 people, and your experience is farming and 4-H and how to be a homemaker. Girls were nurses and teachers. Those were we had college prep tracks, but we were expected to go in certain directions. So to have people come from England, for me personally, was, oh my God, if they can come here, you can go there. You might not be able to go now, but you can go later. And it was my first actual, global experience at home. And it kind of set me up to just always in the future, whenever I could, want to travel to Europe. So as we now look back, right, it's been all these decades, and I'm so curious to find out what happened since the trips sort of petered out. And maybe there's a possibility to begin them again, which would be very exciting, very exciting. Um, there's a lot to mine there. There's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of what it was like. I did a little research, and I was delighted to learn that in 2019 the BBC asked Coventry, Connecticut to fly the Godiva flag for the contest to design the flag. And there's a picture of the flag with Lady Godiva. Could not be further from, farming community, Coventry, Connecticut, flying in front of the town hall. So I was happy to see that as recently as 2019, that linkage was still there. It hadn't completely gone away. So that was very exciting to me. And I'm really hoping, through my connection with your project and perhaps the postcard project, which I think is just brilliant, to be able to resurrect that same excitement in the 21st century in a new way, of course, that I had back in 1967, 68.
Yeah, fingers crossed that is the hope. And
Yes.
I feel like enthusiasm like yours and everyone else's that I've had the opportunity to speak with, I think that is not just a real possibility, but like an inevitability.
Yeah, absolutely. Great way to put it. I feel that way too. Also, in my research, I discovered you've got something called a God cake.
I'm I don't think I've heard of a god cake myself before.
Oh my goodness. I learned that it's a 14th century puff pastry with mincemeat in a triangle shape.
Huh.
And it's a New Year's Eve tradition. See, look at that. I'm already acclimating to
Beautiful cultural
being in the
exchange.
UK. Yeah, yeah. So, there's just so many things. Oh, and the other thing that I love that I discovered was the Three Trees Peace Garden
Okay.
in Belgrave Square. So, so you don't know about that. You don't know
Um,
about?
I'm unfamiliar, but you share with
Okay.
me in the audience.
Thank,
Yeah.
thank you, because this I really love. So it's the Wiccan Peace Garden in Belgrave Square, and every twin city has its own tree. So it's called Three Trees Peace Garden, featuring the hazel tree, maple, and holly. And so the Coventries from the United States, their assigned tree is holly, and the three trees represent the three spires that survived the World War II bombing blitz. And I just love that. And to know that Coventry's US are represented with the holly, which is such a beautiful bush. So one of the things I'm going to do, one of the things I am going to done is a planting of hollies at the town hall in honor of our affiliation all these decades. I am determined to get that done.
That's a beautiful way to immortalize the connection between the two cities.
Yes, yeah. And it's just such a, Coventry Peace Month began in 1940. So that runs for you guys, mid-October to mid-November. I think particularly in these times, in these turbulent times, it's so important to focus on ways to bridge our humanity with one another. And what better way than to focus on peace?
Absolutely. Um, I would like to go past, not go past this conversation, but use this conversation to jump onto the work that you've done throughout your life, writing, art, activism. And after all of this, I'm very curious to know how having your world opened up in such a way affected the way you viewed your creativity.
Right. So I have been writing since I was 5 years old. My first poem was when I was 10 years old, and I wrote it about scary Halloween. And I have just been writing, writing, writing ever since. I haven't had any sort of large success, but I've had a lot of local successes and regional successes. I've done a lot of reporting and stories around art, interviewing, artists for our 1,000-seat theater locally. And through the years, always been drawn to the bigger field. And I think that harkens back to the revelation of the reality that there is a bigger world out there, and you, Susan, can be part of that. That also then led me, I think, from a very early age to social justice and activism, political activism, particularly in the last 4 years. Yeah, God, those are in the past. Um, but I just feel like that we all have a role to play, and it's not just limited to our own backyard, that we can act, we can do what we can in our own backyard, but know that there's a reverberating effect when you do that throughout the world, throughout the state, throughout the region, throughout the country, and then ultimately throughout the world. And so that's been a driving principle for me. I was the executive director of an AIDS service organization serving people with HIV and AIDS for 15 years. And that was tough in rural New Hampshire, where I lived at the time. A lot of misconception, a lot of discrimination, and those 15 years taught me even more so about how important it is to get the word out, to make sure that you say what you mean to say, whether it's written or spoken, and to stand up for people who were disenfranchised in some way, to make sure that their lives were what they should be, and not just because of a status that they might hold, a medical status that they might hold. And then that, of course, translated into experiences with racism and poverty and homelessness and incarceration. So my world has touched on all of those areas, and in each case, I've done writing, a variety of writing about it. So so again, when I think back to my formative years, I'm not so sure what would have happened if I didn't realize there was a bigger world than Coventry, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must be very interesting to sort of see the introduction of like the internet and like very fast paced communication between like, people over Facebook and Twitter and what have you, as opposed to like literally needing people to break into your world in order to realize how big and how far it like spanned.
Oh, it's totally different. You're absolutely right. I mean, your generation so takes for granted all of the things that have just been these, brilliant. Oh my God, we can do that. Oh my God, there's an internet. We can email. You know, so now we're all kind of savvy and cool, even though we're older. But when we were your age, I was in a rural community
Hmm.
and we wrote letters. If we wanted to communicate with someone, we picked up the phone, which of course was a party line. So you'd pick up the phone, you might hear someone else speak, like, oh, sorry. I know it's funny, right? We were, my older friends and I, the friends who went to the UK, as we were talking about this, we were reminiscing about the differences between then and now. To get to the UK, like you had to get a passport. Oh my God, if you had a passport, that just meant the globe was yours.
Like the golden ticket to the world.
Like the golden ticket, like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. That's exactly right. So you just can't underestimate that. And I'm so pleased that you and Rose sort of focus in on that, because that's what's really important. The experiences that all of the subsequent band members, for instance, had when they went to the UK in various decades. You can't. A friend of mine had a son who was in the band and went to the UK in the 80s twice. So I'm also going to speak with him, and I can't wait to hear his experience versus our experience, 20 years earlier.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. I'm thrilled.
So we are nearing the end of this little interview.
Hmm.
But as I do so, I tend to like to ask my guests like a couple closing questions. And I was really excited for the ones I wanted to ask you because of what you'd written to me uh, about your bio and to the post you'd sent to me. But first of all, we'd spoken a little bit about like what comes next for Rose's projects and what it means for like the twin cities of Coventry getting together, reuniting. Um, but outside of that, what is next for you, either in the creative world or just for you personally, that relates to the global community that we're building?
Wow, that is a big question. I am hoping that through this experience, I'll be connected to other like minded people involved in this project, and then be able to see what the other opportunities are. You know, I also want to write about what you're doing. So I'm working right now, because I am a writer and I am a researcher. I'm putting together all kinds of research. I've given just little snippets here, but I want to put together a historical look at what it was like in the 60s through the efforts now that are happening with you, with the BBC, with the City of Culture, and then have that compendium to share with the historical society, maybe get it published, in newspapers or magazines. That's sort of what I'm working on as a direct result of coming into your world around twinning. Personally, I'm just writing all the time, and I am intrigued with a local organization who puts out prompts where there's a subject matter and you've only got 100 words in which to express your opinion. And that's a real challenge for someone who loves words and loves to write, to sort of narrow it down to just 100 words. And when Rose talked to me about the postcard project, I immediately hearkened to that experience. Like, oh my goodness, like we would have a haiku on a postcard that we would send to someone else, in the world. So, so there's those couple of things that I'm working on. I'm very excited about this article that I'm putting together because no one's done that. And I think that it needs that kind of, the experience needs that kind of prominence.
Absolutely.
For Coventry, Connecticut, there needs to be a history that's more than the archives in the Historical Society, but a human story
Yeah.
about what it meant and what it still means.
Um, I think that's very beautifully put. Um, then my final question. Typically, I would ask you to leave advice for people, but I want to ask you a very specific question.
Okay.
What does it mean to be human?
Oh, let's not close with the really big question. Well, I think what it means to be human is to recognize the fact that all of our differences are what connect us. And I mean that not in some sort of flip way, but deeply. When I went on a service trip to South Africa in 2019 with AIDS orphans, I saw firsthand that people in South Africa who didn't even, I didn't speak their language. It wasn't that they didn't speak my language. I couldn't speak their language. But I just saw firsthand that it didn't even matter, that reading one another's eyes, looking into one another's face, expressions that you can share, that's what matters most. And we need to just treasure the humanity of one another across the globe and do what we can to be a connector that is honorable and memorable and meaningful. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but off the cuff, that's what it means to me to be human. It's to love one another.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me this evening,
Oh, thank
Susan.
you. I can't wait to connect with you again.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I will be asking for all of your details after we have closed up today.
Okay.
But thank you for everyone who's listened to this episode of Round Trip. Be sure to contact us, leave comments, whatever it need be. But for now, this is goodbye.